When my daughter walked out on her disabled son 15 years ago, I made a promise that changed both our lives forever. What I discovered last month made my blood run cold, but the choice I made afterward shocked everyone who knew us. I'm grateful you're here to hear this story. Please follow along until the end and comment which state you're watching from so I can see how far this reaches. I never imagined I'd be raising a child again at 56 years old, but life has a cruel sense of humor sometimes. My name is Eleanor Vasquez, and I'm 71 now, sitting in my small home in Tucson, Arizona, trying to make sense of the whirlwind that has become my life these past few weeks. The story I'm about to share with you spans 15 years of sacrifice, heartbreak, late nights filled with worry, and ultimately a kind of justice I never expected, but perhaps always hoped for. Let me take you back to where it all began, a cold February morning in 2009 that would reshape the course of my entire existence. My daughter, Vanessa, was 28 years old at the time. She'd always been what people called a go-getter, ambitious, driven, and intensely focused on climbing the social ladder. She married young, at 24, to a man named Cole Brennan who worked in real estate development. They seemed like the perfect couple on paper, attractive, successful, with a beautiful Adobe-style home in one of Tucson's upscale neighborhoods. When Vanessa gave birth to their son, Ethan, I remember thinking that finally she might slow down and appreciate what truly mattered in life. I was so naive. Ethan was a beautiful baby, with dark curls and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with intense curiosity. For the first 18 months of his life, everything seemed normal. He babbled, he smiled, he reached for toys like any other child. Vanessa would post pictures on social media constantly, the perfect mother with the perfect baby, living the perfect life. Then came the diagnosis that shattered that carefully constructed image. Ethan had cerebral palsy. The doctors explained it was likely caused by complications during birth, something about oxygen deprivation that we hadn't caught in time. The neurologist sat us all down in his office, the afternoon sun streaming through the blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his desk, and laid out what Ethan's future would look like. Ethan will face significant physical challenges, Dr. Morrison said, his voice gentle but clinical. His motor skills will be severely affected. He'll need a wheelchair for mobility. His speech will be impacted, though his cognitive abilities appear to be intact. With proper therapy, physical, occupational, and speech, he can lead a fulfilling life, but he'll require substantial support and care. I watched my daughter's face as the doctor spoke. I saw something I'd never seen there before. Not sadness, not determination, but something that looked disturbingly like revulsion. Her jaw tightened, her eyes went cold, and she sat perfectly still, as if freezing in place might make the reality go away. Cole's reaction was different, but equally troubling. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out the parking lot below, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless. "What's the cost for all this therapy and equipment?" Dr. Morrison explained the financial reality, tens of thousands of dollars annually, even with good insurance. Special equipment, home modifications, ongoing medical care. It was overwhelming, certainly, but not impossible for a family with their income level. That's when Vanessa spoke for the first time since we'd entered the office. "Can we fix it? Surgery, experimental treatments, anything?" "Mrs. Brennan," Dr. Morrison said carefully, "cerebral palsy is a permanent condition. Treatment focuses on maximizing quality of life and independence, but there's no cure." The word permanent seemed to hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, and I saw her chest rise and fall with several deep breaths. When she opened them again, something fundamental had changed in her expression. The drive home from that appointment was silent, except for Ethan's happy babbling from his car seat. He had no idea that his life, and all of ours, had just been fundamentally altered. Over the next few weeks, I watched my daughter transform into someone I barely recognized. She stopped posting pictures of Ethan on social media. She hired a full-time nanny rather than caring for him herself. She threw herself into her work at the marketing firm where she was climbing the corporate ladder, staying late at the office more nights than not. Cole wasn't much better. He started taking longer business trips, finding excuses to be away from home. When he was there, he barely looked at Ethan, as if avoiding eye contact with his son might make the situation less real. I tried to intervene. I really did. I'd come over to help with Ethan's therapy appointments, to show Vanessa and Cole how to work with him, to demonstrate that yes, it was challenging, but it was also rewarding. Ethan was still their beautiful, sweet boy. The diagnosis didn't change who he was at his core, but I couldn't reach them. They'd already made up their minds. The day Vanessa called me to her house for an important conversation, I knew something terrible was coming. I could feel it in my bones as I drove through the desert landscape toward her neighborhood, the February sun harsh and unforgiving. She met me at the door, perfectly dressed as always, her makeup flawless, her hair styled in a way that must have taken an hour. She led me to her pristine living room with its white furniture and expensive art, a room that had never seemed designed for a child to live in.
"Mom, I need you to sit down," she said, her voice carrying the same tone she probably used in business presentations. "Cole and I have made a decision." I sat on the edge of her white sofa, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, preparing for whatever blow was coming. "We're separating," she continued, "and we've both decided that we're not equipped to raise a special needs child. We're young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Ethan deserves someone who can dedicate themselves entirely to his care." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I stared at my daughter, searching her face for any sign of the girl I'd raised, the woman I thought I knew. "You're abandoning your son?" I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. "You're walking away from Ethan because he has a disability?" "We're being realistic," Vanessa corrected sharply. "Do you know what raising a severely disabled child would do to our lives, our careers, our futures? I'm 28 years old, Mom. I have so much I still want to accomplish. Cole has a major development deal in Phoenix that requires his full attention. We can't do that and provide the level of care Ethan needs." "So you'll just throw him away?" My voice was rising now, anger flooding through my chest. "Like a piece of furniture that no longer matches your decor?" "Don't be dramatic," Vanessa snapped. "We're not throwing him away. We're finding him a better situation, which is where you come in." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Me? You raised me as a single mother after Dad died. You managed just fine on a school librarian's salary. You're experienced with sacrifice and making things work on a budget." She said it so casually, as if she were asking me to water her plants while she went on vacation. "We want you to become Ethan's legal guardian." I stood up, my legs shaking. "Vanessa, I'm 56 years old. I was planning to retire in a few years. I can't or won't." Her eyes flashed with something ugly. "Isn't this what grandmothers do? Step up for family?" Grandmothers support their children in raising grandchildren. They don't replace mothers who are perfectly capable but simply choose not to parent. "I've already contacted a lawyer," Vanessa said coldly. "Cole and I are prepared to sign away our parental rights. The only question is whether you'll step up or if we'll have to look into state care options." The threat was clear. Take Ethan or watch him go into the foster system. I looked past her, through the doorway into the den where I could see Ethan in his play yard, babbling happily to himself, completely unaware that his parents were discussing disposing of him like an unwanted responsibility. "How can you do this?" I whispered. "How can you look at your own child and feel nothing?" "I feel plenty," Vanessa said, but her voice was devoid of emotion. "I feel trapped. I feel cheated. I feel like my life was supposed to go differently. Ethan deserves a parent who wants to be there. And that's not me, Mom. It's just not." That's when I realized the horrible truth. She wasn't conflicted. She wasn't struggling with this decision. She'd already mourned the loss of her perfect life and moved on emotionally. Ethan was already gone to her, already a closed chapter. "I'll do it," I heard myself say. "I'll take him." But Vanessa, When you walk away from him, you're walking away from me too. Don't expect me to pretend this is anything other than what it is, abandonment." She had the grace to look away, but only briefly. "I'm sure you'll change your mind once you've had time to think rationally about this." But I never did change my mind, and she never came back. The legal process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which Vanessa and Cole signed papers, met with lawyers, and legally severed their ties to their 3-year-old son. I hired my own attorney, using money I'd saved for a trip to Spain that would never happen, to ensure the guardianship was airtight. During those 6 weeks, Vanessa didn't visit Ethan once. She had the nanny bring him to my small house on the east side of Tucson with his belongings packed in boxes and trash bags. No ceremony, no tearful goodbye, no final embrace, just boxes of clothes and toys delivered like a furniture shipment. Cole showed up once, the day before the papers were finalized. He stood in my living room, looking uncomfortable and out of place among my thrift store furniture and worn carpets. "I want you to know this isn't personal," he said, as if that made it better. "Vanessa and I, we're just not parent material. Not for this situation." "Every parent situation is this situation," I replied coldly. "You adapt, you grow, you love your child more than you love your convenience." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000. For Ethan's care. It's all I can offer. I took the check because I had to. I was about to take on enormous expenses with no additional income. But I felt sick touching it, like I was accepting payment for my grandson. Cole left and I never saw him again. He moved to Phoenix with his development company and started a new life. Last I heard, he remarried and had 2 more children, healthy ones apparently, that he had no problem raising. Vanessa's transformation was even more complete. Within months, she'd relocated to Denver for what she called a career opportunity she couldn't pass up. She changed her phone number without giving me the new one. She shut down her social media accounts and started fresh with new profiles that made no mention of ever having had a child.
She sent birthday cards to Ethan for the first few years, generic drugstore cards with cartoon characters, signed simply Mom, with no personal message, no phone number, no return address. They came from different cities as she climbed the corporate ladder: Denver, Seattle, San Francisco. By the time Ethan was 8, even the cards stopped coming. My life changed overnight in ways I couldn't have fully prepared for, even knowing what was coming. My small 2-bedroom ranch house, which had been perfectly adequate for a single woman preparing for retirement, suddenly needed major modifications. I took out a home equity loan to install wheelchair ramps at the front and back entrances. I converted my guest room into Ethan's bedroom, installing grab bars in the attached bathroom, buying a special bed that could adjust positions, setting up storage for medical supplies and equipment. The costs were staggering. Even with Cole's $10,000, which lasted less than a year, and my decent health insurance through the school district, I was hemorrhaging money. Ethan needed physical therapy 3 times a week at $75 per session, even after insurance. He needed occupational therapy twice a week, speech therapy once a week, special equipment, a wheelchair, a stander, adaptive utensils, communication devices. I'd planned to retire at 60, with a comfortable pension from my 35 years as a school librarian. Instead, I found myself taking on extra work wherever I could find it. I tutored students after school at $30 an hour. I worked at the public library on weekends. I took in mending and alterations. Every penny went toward Ethan's care. But here's what no one tells you about becoming a guardian to a disabled child in your late 50s. It's not just about the money or the physical exhaustion, though both are real and relentless. It's about the complete restructuring of your identity and your future. I'd dreamed of traveling once I retired. I'd wanted to take an art class, maybe learn pottery. I'd imagined lazy mornings, sleeping in, afternoons reading in the park, evenings with friends. Instead, my days started at 5:30 a.m., helping Ethan with his morning routine.
bathroom assistance, dressing, breakfast that had to be carefully managed because of his swallowing difficulties. Then there were the looks. Oh, the looks from other people. At the grocery store, in restaurants, at the park. Some were sympathetic, the pitying glances that said, "That poor old woman, taking care of that disabled boy." Others were curious or uncomfortable, people who stared and then looked away quickly when I caught them. And some were judgmental. I could see it in their eyes. Where are this child's parents? Why is his grandmother doing this? What kind of family abandons a child? I wanted to wear a sign sometimes. His mother chose her career over him. His father chose his freedom. I chose love. Because despite everything, the exhaustion, the financial strain, the complete upending of my life plans, I did love Ethan. How could I not? He was innocent in all of this, a sweet boy who'd been dealt a difficult hand through no fault of his own. Those early years were brutal, I won't lie. There were nights I collapsed into bed with my whole body aching, muscles I didn't know I had, screaming in protest from lifting and transferring Ethan throughout the day. There were moments of such profound loneliness. Most of my friends were entering a carefree retirement phase, traveling and pursuing hobbies, while I was more tied down than I'd been even when raising Vanessa. I had moments of anger, too. Rage, really, at the unfairness of it all. I'd already raised one child alone after my husband, Miguel, died in a construction accident when Vanessa was only 7. I'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much to give her every opportunity. And this was how she repaid me? By dumping her own disabled child in my lap and walking away without a backward glance? But Ethan made it bearable. More than bearable. He made it worthwhile. Despite his physical limitations, Ethan had a spirit that refused to be crushed. His mind was sharp and curious. His speech was affected. Words came slowly and required effort, but once you learned to listen patiently, you discovered a thoughtful, funny, incredibly bright child. Eleanor, he said to me one day when he was about 5. He'd started calling me Gran Eleanor instead of just Grandma, a formality that both amused and touched me. Why do I need this chair? We were in the backyard, such as it was, a small patch of desert landscaping with some struggling grass I tried to maintain for him. He was sitting in his wheelchair, watching other kids play in the neighbors' yards. I knelt beside him, taking his hand. Your legs don't work the same way other kids' legs do. The chair helps you move around. Will they ever work? This was the conversation I'd been dreading. No, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean you can't do amazing things. Your brain works perfectly. Your heart works perfectly. Those are the most important parts. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, Mama didn't want a boy in a chair? My heart cracked. He was 5 years old and already understood, at some level, that he'd been rejected because of his disability. Your mama wasn't ready to be the mom you needed, I said, choosing my words carefully. But you have me, and I'm not going anywhere. Ever. I promise. He looked at me with those dark eyes so much like his mother's and smiled. Love you, Gran Eleanor. I love you too, my brilliant boy.
And he was brilliant. As Ethan grew older, his intellectual capabilities became increasingly apparent. He devoured books. I'd bring home stacks from the school library where I worked, and he'd tear through them. By 7, he was reading at a middle school level. By 8, he'd exhausted the young adult section and moved on to adult fiction and nonfiction. But it was his fascination with computers that really caught my attention. When Ethan was about 8, I noticed he wasn't just playing games on the old desktop computer I'd bought secondhand for him.
He was taking them apart, figuratively speaking. He'd figured out how to access the game code, modify parameters, change how things worked. "Gran Eleanor," he said one day, his speech improving with years of therapy, though still slower than typical. "I want to learn to actually make games, not just play them." I knew nothing about programming or game development, but I was good at research. I spent hours at the library after my shift ended, finding books on basic coding, printing out free tutorials from the internet. I brought them home to Ethan, and he absorbed the information like a sponge. By the time he was 10, Ethan had taught himself HTML and CSS. By 11, he was working in JavaScript and Python. By 12, he'd built his first simple game, a text-based adventure that he proudly showed me, explaining every line of code. "This is remarkable, Ethan," I told him, genuinely awed, even though I understood maybe 10% of what he was showing me. "You have a real gift." "I want to build something important, something that helps people like me." That's when I knew. My grandson wasn't just smart, he had vision and purpose. Despite everything he'd been through, despite being abandoned by his parents, despite the daily challenges of living with a disability, he wanted to help others. I made a decision that night. Whatever it took, however long it took, I would help Ethan pursue this dream. We didn't have money or connections, but we had determination and each other. The years between 10 and 15 were a blur of code, tutorials, online classes, and unwavering dedication. I worked every extra hour I could to pay for courses on Udemy and Coursera. I learned alongside Ethan, trying to understand his passion even when the technical details flew over my head. Ethan would spend 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours a day at his computer setup. Monitors I'd slowly acquired through yard sales and Craigslist, a better desktop I'd saved months to buy. His bedroom became mission control, filled with equipment and whiteboards covered in diagrams and code snippets. Money remained crushingly tight. There were months I had to choose between buying groceries or paying for therapy. Times when I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation because buying myself new clothes meant one less book or course for Ethan. I drove a car that was 20 years old and burned oil because replacing it was impossible. But we made it work. Somehow, we always made it work. When Ethan was 13, I came home from the library one evening to find him practically vibrating with excitement. "Gran Eleanor, I figured it out." His speech was better now, after years of therapy, though he still spoke more slowly than typical. "I want to build." He showed me his sketches and notes, an app designed specifically for people with disabilities. It would use AI to help with daily tasks, medication scheduling, appointment reminders, caregiver coordination, finding accessible locations. It would integrate with smart home devices so people with limited mobility could control their environment with voice commands. It would have features for different types of disabilities: visual, auditory, cognitive, physical. "I'm calling it Access Point," he said, his eyes shining, "because it's a point of access to the world for people who face barriers." I looked at my 16-year-old grandson, still small for his age, still bound to his wheelchair, still facing dozens of daily challenges, and saw someone who wanted to dedicate his talents to helping others like him. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Time," he said honestly, "and probably money we don't have. This is going to take years to build properly. And we'll need to eventually form a real company, get it professionally developed, market it." He trailed off, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was proposing. I sat down beside his wheelchair and took his hand. "Then we'll take our time, and we'll find the money. I believe in you, Ethan. I've always believed in you." Over the next 2 years, I did something that terrified me. I took out a small business loan for $25,000 using my house as collateral. At 67 years old, I bet everything on my grandson's dream. We used that money carefully. Ethan did most of the development work himself, but we hired occasional consultants when he got stuck on complex problems. We paid for business licensing and incorporation. We invested in better equipment so Ethan could work more efficiently. I became his business partner in ways I never imagined. I learned about app development, patent law, business plans, and investor pitches. I went to meetings that Ethan couldn't easily attend due to mobility challenges, representing our company to potential partners and investors. We faced rejection after rejection. People would see me, a woman in her late 60s with no tech background and a teenager in a wheelchair, and they'd dismiss us before we could even finish our pitch. We were told we weren't serious enough, that we didn't have the right pedigree, that perhaps we should start smaller.
But Ethan never gave up. Every rejection made him more determined. He'd go back to his computer and make Access Point better, add more features, refine the interface. And then, finally, we got our break. A venture capital firm in Phoenix agreed to meet with us. The senior partner, a woman named Victoria Chen, had a brother with muscular dystrophy. When Ethan demonstrated Access Point, showing how someone with limited hand mobility could control their entire smart home with voice commands, how the AI could learn a user's speech patterns and predict needs, how it integrated with medical devices and caregiver schedules, Victoria actually teared up. "This isn't just an app," she said quietly. "This changes lives. This gives people independence." She funded us. Not a huge amount, $100,000 initial investment, but enough to properly launch Access Point. Within 6 months of launching, we had 50,000 users. Within a year, 500,000. Disability advocacy groups were recommending it, medical professionals were prescribing it, major tech publications were writing about it. And then, 18 months after launch, a major tech corporation made an acquisition offer. $3.2 million for Access Point and its technology. Ethan, now 19, sat in his wheelchair in our living room, still the same small house in Tucson we'd lived in for 15 years, and stared at the offer letter. "Grand Eleanor," he said quietly, "we did it." I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I sat on our worn couch and cried tears of relief and pride and joy. My grandson, the boy his mother had abandoned as a burden, had built something extraordinary. The media attention was immediate. Local news stations wanted to interview the teenage entrepreneur who'd built a multi-million-dollar app while navigating life with cerebral palsy. Tech blogs wrote profiles. Disability advocacy organizations invited Ethan to speak at conferences. For 15 years, Vanessa had been completely absent. Not a phone call, not a visit, not a single word beyond those early birthday cards that had stopped when Ethan was 8. She'd moved on with her life, remarried a wealthy tech executive in San Francisco, climbed to a senior vice president position at her marketing firm. She lived like Ethan had never existed. I'd see her occasionally on LinkedIn, her profile polished and professional, making no mention of having a child. I'd glimpse her on her company's website, smiling in expensive suits at corporate events. She'd built the life she wanted, the life she told me she deserved, by walking away from her son. Part of me had always wondered if she thought about him, if she felt guilt or regret, if she ever lay awake at night wondering what kind of person abandons their disabled child. I got my answer 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of beautiful spring day that makes living in Arizona worth the brutal summers. I was in the kitchen making breakfast, Ethan was at his computer in his room working on new features for Access Point, and life felt good for the first time in years. We were stable financially, Ethan was thriving, and the future looked bright. Then, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Vanessa standing on my front porch. She was 43 now, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment.
Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive. She looked like she had stepped out of a corporate boardroom. But it was her companion that made my blood run cold. Beside her stood a man in his 40s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He had that unmistakable look of an attorney, polished, professional, predatory. "Hello, Mother," Vanessa said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think it's time we discussed Ethan's future." My hand tightened on the doorframe. His future. Yes, she gestured to the man beside her. "This is Richard Thornton, my attorney. We have some legal matters to address regarding my son." My son. After 15 years of silence, after abandoning him when he needed her most, after building a life that pretended he didn't exist, she was calling him my son. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I said coldly. "Actually, we do," Richard said smoothly. Ms. Kellerman now, has substantial legal rights as Ethan's biological mother. The guardianship arrangement you currently have can be contested, especially now that Ethan has become a person of significant financial means." And there it was, laid bare with no pretense. Vanessa hadn't come back because she loved her son. She hadn't come back because she regretted abandoning him. She'd come back because he was worth $3.2 million and she wanted her cut. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing her face, and felt something inside me crystallize into steel. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Mom, don't be unreasonable," Vanessa said. "Ethan is my son. I have rights, and I think we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." "Everyone except Ethan, who you threw away like garbage when he was 3 years old." "I was young and overwhelmed. People make mistakes. I deserve a chance to reconnect with my son now that I'm in a better place to support him." "Support him?" I laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You want to support the bank account he created, you mean?" "Mrs. Vasquez," Richard interjected, "perhaps we should all sit down and discuss this civilly. My client is prepared to be very generous regarding your past contributions to Ethan's care, but we need to address the current legal situation." "Grand Eleanor?" Ethan's voice came from inside the house. "Who's at the door?" I saw Vanessa's face change, saw her take a small step forward, preparing to see her son for the first time in 15 years. And I made my decision.
"No one important," I called back. Then to Vanessa and her lawyer, "If you have legal papers to serve, do it properly. Otherwise, leave. Now." Vanessa's expression hardened. "You're going to regret this, Mother. I gave birth to that boy. The law will see things my way. The law will see that you voluntarily terminated your parental rights 15 years ago, that you abandoned a disabled 3-year-old, that you've had 0 contact with your son for over a decade. Try your luck with that." I closed the door in their faces and locked it with shaking hands. Through the front window, I watched them walk back to Vanessa's expensive SUV parked in my driveway, a Tesla that cost more than I'd make in 5 years. She was talking animatedly to her lawyer, gesturing back at my house. This wasn't over. I knew that with bone-deep certainty. After 15 years of silence, Vanessa had returned, and she'd brought a lawyer. The war for Ethan's future and his fortune had begun. The door had barely closed behind Vanessa and her lawyer when Ethan rolled into the living room, his wheelchair navigating the familiar path through our small house with practiced ease. "Grand Eleanor, who was that?" he asked again, his dark eyes searching my face with the same intensity he used when debugging code. "You look upset." I forced my trembling hands to steady themselves, smoothing down my worn cotton blouse as I tried to compose my expression. After 15 years of protecting this boy from the truth about his mother's cruelty, I wasn't about to let one surprise visit shatter the peace we'd built. "Solicitors," I lied, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "People trying to sell something we don't need." Ethan's eyebrows drew together in that skeptical way that reminded me he wasn't a child anymore. At 19, he'd grown into a sharp, perceptive young man who could read people as easily as he read code. But he didn't push, just nodded slowly. Okay. Well, I wanted to show you something. His face brightened with the enthusiasm that always emerged when he talked about his work. I've been working on a new accessibility feature for Access Point. It uses machine learning to predict user needs based on their daily patterns. Like, if someone typically takes medication at 8 a.m. but hasn't opened their pill organizer by 8:15, the app sends an alert. But it learns, so if they're consistently taking it at 8:30 on Tuesdays because of a weekly appointment, it adjusts the reminder accordingly. I followed him back to his room, listening to his explanation while my mind raced in a dozen different directions. His bedroom was a testament to both his genius and our limited means. 3 mismatched monitors on a desk I'd built from scrap lumber, a high-end computer I'd saved 2 years to buy, whiteboards covering every wall with diagrams and code snippets in Ethan's careful handwriting, and adaptive equipment I had acquired piece by piece to make his workspace fully accessible. "That's brilliant, sweetheart," I said, watching him demonstrate the feature on his screen. And it was brilliant, the kind of intuitive, thoughtful design that had made Access Point so successful. But I could barely focus on his words. Vanessa was back. After 15 years of silence, of building a life that pretended Ethan didn't exist, she'd returned, with a lawyer in tow. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning. The letter arrived 2 days later, delivered by a process server, who handed me the thick envelope with professional indifference before walking away. I stood on my front porch in the late morning heat, Arizona's sun beating down mercilessly, and stared at the return address. Thornton and Associates, Legal Counsel, San Francisco, California. My hands shook as I opened it. The legal language was dense and deliberately intimidating, but the core message was crystal clear. Vanessa Kellerman, formerly Brennan, was filing a motion to terminate my guardianship of Ethan Brennan and establish herself as his primary legal guardian. The petition cited her biological rights as his mother, her financial stability, and what it called, quote, changed circumstances that warrant a reevaluation of the minor's best interests. Minor. Ethan was 19, legally an adult in a matter of months when he turned 20. But the lawyers had clearly timed this carefully, filing while he was still technically a minor and the guardianship arrangement was still legally binding. There was more. Vanessa was also filing for conservatorship over Ethan's financial assets, claiming that, as a person with significant disabilities, he required a legal conservator to manage his substantial wealth. And she was petitioning for back child support, calculating what she would have paid over 15 years if she had remained his legal parent, then claiming I owed her that amount for usurping her parental rights and financial responsibilities. The audacity of it took my breath away. She wanted to take control of Ethan's life and his money, and she wanted me to pay her for the privilege of raising the child she abandoned? I sank down onto my porch step, the papers clutched in my hands, and tried to process what this meant. I'd raised Ethan on a librarian's pension and whatever extra work I could scrap together. I'd taken out loans to support his dream, used my house as collateral. I had maybe $15,000 in savings, money I'd been carefully saving aside for Ethan's future needs. Vanessa was a senior vice president at a major marketing firm, married to a tech executive. She could afford the best lawyers money could buy. She could bury me in legal fees even if I had a case. And despite everything, despite her abandonment, despite 15 years of absence, and the decisive, obvious greed motivating this action, she was still Ethan's biological mother. The law gave her rights I couldn't simply dismiss. "Granellinger?" I looked up to find Ethan in the doorway, concern etched across his face. How long had I been sitting there? "What's wrong? You've been out here for 20 minutes. I folded the papers quickly, but not quickly enough. Ethan had always been observant. "What's that?" he asked. "Is something wrong? Is it about money? The bills?"
For 15 years, I'd protected him from ugly truths. I'd shielded him from knowing the full extent of his mother's cruelty, from understanding how completely she'd rejected him. I told him simplified versions. His mother wasn't ready to be a parent. She'd made a difficult choice. She wanted what was best for him, even if it meant stepping away. But looking at him now, this brilliant, kind, resilient young man who'd overcome so much, I realized he deserved the truth. He was about to be dragged into a legal battle whether I wanted to protect him or not. "Come sit with me," I said, patting the step beside me. "We need to talk about something important." Ethan maneuvered his wheelchair to the edge of the porch, and I moved to sit beside him, holding his hand as I'd done countless times over the years. "Your mother came to visit the other day. That wasn't solicitors at the door." I watched his face change, saw the flicker of hope mixed with confusion and old hurt. "My mother? Vanessa?" "Yes. She came with a lawyer." I took a breath. "Ethan, I need to tell you some things I've kept from you to spare you pain. But you're an adult now, and you deserve the full truth." Over the next hour, I told him everything. How Vanessa and Cole had signed away their rights within weeks of his diagnosis, how she'd moved away and changed her number, how she'd built a life that erased him from her history. I showed him the legal papers, explained what conservatorship meant, what she was trying to do. Ethan listened in silence, his face becoming more closed off with each revelation. When I finished, he sat very still, staring out at the street. "She wants the money," he said finally, his voice flat. "From Access Point." "Yes." "And she thinks I'm not capable of managing it myself? Because of this?" He gestured at his wheelchair, his affected limbs. "She thinks the disability that made me inconvenient as a child now makes me incompetent as an adult?" The bitterness in his voice broke my heart. "Ethan!" "No, it's fine. It's actually kind of funny, in a horrible way." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She rejected me because taking care of a disabled kid was too much work. Now she wants to control my money because being disabled means I can't be trusted to manage it. I'm either too much burden or too incompetent, depending on what's convenient for her." "We're going to fight this," I said firmly. "I'm going to find us a lawyer. We'll contest every single claim she's making." "With what money?" Ethan asked quietly. "Gran Eleanor, I've seen our bank statements. I know exactly how tight things have been. Even with Access Point's success, most of the acquisition money is still tied up in the sale process. And she can afford lawyers who cost more per hour than you made in a week as a librarian." He was right, and we both knew it. "Then we'll figure something out," I insisted. "We always do." But that night, lying awake in my bed, I felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on my chest. How was I supposed to fight someone with Vanessa's resources? How could I protect Ethan from a legal system that might very well decide his biological mother had rights, despite her abandonment? The next morning, I started making phone calls. I contacted every lawyer I could find who offered free consultations, explaining our situation in careful detail. Most were sympathetic, but realistic about our chances. "Ms. Vasquez, I'll be honest with you," said Michael Torres, the fifth attorney I'd spoken to. "Your daughter's abandonment and the circumstances of the guardianship transfer work in your favor, but California family law is complex, and biological parents have significant rights, even when those rights were previously terminated. The fact that she's claiming Ethan needs a conservator for his disability adds another layer of complication." "But he doesn't need a conservator," I protested. "He built a multi-million-dollar app. He manages all his own medical care, his appointments, his daily life. He's more capable than most 20-year-olds. "I believe you, but proving that in court, especially against arguments from medical experts and disability advocates that her lawyers will undoubtedly bring in, that's going to be expensive and challenging. We're talking legal fees that could easily reach $50,000 to $100,000. Money I didn't have. Money that would take everything Ethan had worked for. I called 23 lawyers over 3 days. The story was the same from all of them. We had a case, but it would be expensive, complicated, and far from guaranteed.
On the fourth day, Ethan rolled into the kitchen where I was nursing my morning coffee and staring at a legal pad filled with notes and crossed-out options. "I've been thinking," he said. "What if I just talked to her?" I looked up sharply. "Absolutely not." "Gran Eleanor, listen. Maybe if I meet with her, explain that I don't need a conservator, show her that I'm capable of managing my own affairs."
You're not giving her a penny, I said fiercely. You earned that money. You built Access Point with your brilliant mind and years of hard work. She doesn't deserve a single cent of it. And you deserve to not be dragged through an expensive legal battle you can't afford, Ethan shot back. Gran Eleanor, you've sacrificed everything for me. Your retirement, your savings, your dreams. I'm not going to watch you lose your house fighting a battle that might be easier to settle. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, both of us stubborn, both of us trying to protect the other. "Just one meeting," Ethan said quietly. "Let me try. If it doesn't work, if she's as bad as you think, then we go to court and fight with everything we have. But at least let me try to resolve this without destroying you financially." Against my better judgment, against every protective instinct I developed over 15 years, I agreed. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday at a coffee shop in downtown Tucson. Neutral territory, public space, somewhere I could be nearby if things went wrong. I helped Ethan get ready that morning, both of us silent and tense. He chose his clothes carefully, a button-down shirt I'd ironed for him, nice jeans, wanting to look mature and capable. I braided my gray hair tightly, put on my best dress, a simple navy blue one I'd bought at a thrift store 5 years ago, and tried to quiet the anxiety turning in my stomach. We arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I'd chosen a table near the window where I could watch from my car parked across the street. Ethan ordered a coffee and positioned his wheelchair at the table, his posture straight and determined despite the nervousness I could see in the set of his shoulders. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, dressed in casual elegance, designer jeans, a silk blouse, expensive sunglasses pushed up into her professionally highlighted hair. She looked like she was meeting a client for a business lunch, not seeing her son for the first time in 15 years. From my car, I watched her approach Ethan's table. I saw her pause for just a moment, saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, at how much he'd grown, or perhaps discomfort at the visible signs of his disability. Then her professional mask slid into place, and she sat down across from him with the smile I recognized from countless PTA meetings and school functions when she was younger. Her "everything is under control" smile. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read body language. Ethan sat stiffly, his hands clasped on the table in front of him. Vanessa leaned forward, animated, gesturing as she talked. She seemed to be doing most of the speaking. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. I counted every one of them, my hands gripping the steering wheel, resisting the urge to burst in and end this farce. Finally, Ethan said something that made Vanessa's smile falter. She leaned back, her posture becoming more rigid. They exchanged a few more words, then Ethan turned his wheelchair and left the coffee shop without looking back. I jumped out of my car and met him on the sidewalk. "How did it go?" I asked, though I could see the answer in his face. "She doesn't want to be my mother," Ethan said quietly as we headed toward the car. "She wants to be my manager, my handler." She spent 45 minutes explaining how she could optimize my public image, leverage my story for better business opportunities, connect me with her network for exponential growth potential. We got to the car and I helped him transfer from his wheelchair to the passenger seat, a routine we'd performed thousands of times. As I folded his wheelchair and put it in the back, Ethan continued. "She never once asked me how I was, what my life has been like, what it was like growing up without her. She talked about brand management, media strategies, investment opportunities.
She said the conservatorship was just a formality to help her protect my interests from people who might try to take advantage of me. She meant you, Gran Eleanor. She said I was probably emotionally dependent on you and couldn't see that you might not be the best person to guide my financial decisions. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I sacrificed, every dream I gave up, every dollar I stretched to breaking point, Vanessa was painting me as a potential exploiter. What did you say to her? I asked, my voice shaking. I told her no. I said I didn't need a conservatorship, that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, and that you were the only person who'd ever truly cared about me. That's when her mask slipped. Ethan's jaw tightened. She said that was exactly the kind of emotional reasoning that proved I needed professional guidance, that disabled people often form unhealthy attachments to their caregivers and can't think rationally about financial matters. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. She actually said that. She said a lot of things. She talked about how hard it was for her when I was diagnosed, how she was so young and unprepared, how she's grown and changed and ready to step up now. She said she's always loved me, but had to make a difficult choice 15 years ago. She made it sound like she was being noble, like abandoning me was some kind of sacrifice for my own good. That's not what happened, I said fiercely. She chose her career and her lifestyle over you. She legally terminated her rights. She walked away without a black look back. I know. Ethan's voice was tired. I could see through every word she said, Gran Eleanor. She's polished and professional, but she's not sincere. She doesn't want a relationship with me. She wants access to my money and control over my decisions, and she's going to fight for it.
We drove home in heavy silence, both of us processing what this meant. The meeting hadn't resolved anything. If anything, it had confirmed our worst fears about Vanessa's motivations. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, chicken and rice, one of Ethan's favorites, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Ms. Vasquez, this is Richard Thornton, Miss Kellerman's attorney. My hand tightened on the phone. I have nothing to say to you. I think you should hear what I have to say, he continued smoothly. I understand Ethan met with his mother today. It's unfortunate that he's not yet ready to accept her help, but that's exactly why the conservatorship petition is necessary. He's unable to make rational decisions about his own best interests. He made a perfectly rational decision to reject a mother who abandoned him, I snapped. From a legal perspective, Ms. Vasquez, emotion-based decisions aren't rational. Ethan is a young man with significant disabilities who's come into substantial wealth. He needs professional guidance, and Ms. Kellerman is prepared to provide that. What do you really want? I asked bluntly. Cut through the legal language and tell me what this is actually about. There was a pause. Then, Ms. Kellerman is willing to be reasonable. She understands that you've provided care for Ethan over the years, and she's prepared to compensate you for that service. If you were to withdraw your opposition to the guardianship transfer and conservatorship, she's authorized me to offer you a settlement of $75,000. My breath caught. $75,000. More money than I'd seen in years, more than enough to pay off my house, rebuild my depleted savings, maybe even take that trip to Spain I dreamed about decades ago. In exchange for giving up Ethan, I said slowly. In exchange for allowing his mother to take her rightful place in his life and provide him with the resources and guidance she can offer. You'd still be his grandmother, Ms. Vasquez. This isn't about cutting you out entirely. It's about ensuring Ethan has the best possible future. And if I say no, then we go to court, and I promise you we will win.
Ms. Kellerman has unlimited resources to pursue this case. She has expert witnesses lined up, disability advocates, financial experts, medical professionals who will testify that Ethan needs a conservator and that she, as his biological mother with substantial means, is the appropriate choice. You, on the other hand, will have to represent yourself or hire a lawyer you can't afford. The outcome is inevitable, Ms. Vasquez. This offer is your chance to walk away with something rather than losing everything. The threat was clear. Take the money and give up, or be buried in legal fees and lose anyway. I need to think, I managed to say. You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires, and we proceed with litigation that will be far more aggressive than what we've filed so far. We'll be seeking full custody transfer, complete conservatorship, and we'll be filing a motion to freeze Ethan's assets pending resolution to prevent any potential misappropriation. That means the access point acquisition money, all of it, will be locked up in legal proceedings that could take years to resolve. He hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, chicken burning on the stove, and tried to process what had just happened. They were threatening to freeze Ethan's money, money he'd earned, money that was supposed to secure his future, unless I backed off and let Vanessa take control. Gran Eleanor? Ethan's voice came from the doorway. Is everything okay? Something's burning. I jerked back to awareness, quickly moving the pan off the heat. The chicken was ruined, blackened on one side. Who was on the phone? Ethan asked, rolling into the kitchen. You look upset. I turned to face him, this brilliant young man I'd raised, this child who'd been abandoned and had somehow grown into someone extraordinary despite it. I thought about the offer, $75,000 to walk away, money I desperately needed, money that could solve so many problems. But taking it would mean abandoning Ethan to a woman who saw him as a financial asset rather than a person. It would mean letting Vanessa win, letting her rewrite history and pretend she was the caring mother stepping up for her disabled son. It would mean betraying every promise I'd made to that 3-year-old boy 15 years ago when I swore I'd never leave him. It was Vanessa's lawyer, I said quietly. They made an offer. Money, if I back off and let her take custody and conservatorship. Ethan's eyes widened. How much? $75,000. The number hung in the air between us. We both knew what that money could mean, what it could do for me, how much easier it would make my life. You should take it, Ethan said finally. Gran Eleanor, that's your future, your security. You've given up so much for me already. Don't give up this too. No. The word came out fierce and certain. Absolutely not. But, Ethan, listen to me. I moved to sit beside him, taking his hands in mine. You are not a burden to be traded for money. You are not something I need to be compensated for caring about. You're my grandson, and I love you more than I love any amount of money. We're going to fight this together, and we're going to win, because you deserve better than a mother who only wants you for your bank account. Tears were streaming down Ethan's face. I don't want you to lose everything because of me. Not again. You've already lost so much.
I've gained so much more, I said, pulling him into a hug. You've given my life meaning, purpose, joy. Watching you grow up, seeing you overcome obstacles, being there when you built Access Point, those are the richest experiences of my life. I wouldn't trade them for anything. We stayed like that for a long moment, holding on to each other in my small kitchen, with its worn linoleum and outdated appliances. In a house I might lose to legal fees, facing an uncertain future. But we would face it together. The next morning, I made a decision that terrified me, but felt absolutely necessary. I called the local news station. "My name is Eleanor Vasquez," I told the producer who answered. "I have a story about my grandson, Ethan Brennan, the creator of Access Point, and about what's happening to him now that he's successful." 2 days later, a reporter named Sofia Martinez arrived at our house with a cameraman. She was a young Latina woman with kind eyes and a direct manner that put me at ease. "Tell me your story," she said, setting up her recording equipment in our living room. "All of it. Don't hold back." So I did. I told her about Vanessa abandoning Ethan when he was 3, about 15 years of raising him alone on a librarian's pension, about watching him build something extraordinary despite every obstacle. I showed her the legal papers, explained the conservatorship petition, described the offer to buy me off. And then Ethan told his side of the story. Sitting in his wheelchair in the home he'd lived in for 15 years, surrounded by evidence of both our poverty and his genius, he talked about growing up without a mother, about using his disability as motivation to help others, about building Access Point not for money, but to make the world more accessible for people like him. "My biological mother didn't want me when I needed her," Ethan said to the camera, his voice steady and clear. "Now she wants to control me because I've become valuable. That's not love, that's exploitation. And I won't let her do it, not just to me, but to other disabled people who might face similar situations." Sophia's eyes were glistening when we finished. "This is powerful," she said. "This story needs to be told. Can I contact some of the national outlets? I think this is bigger than local news." I looked at Ethan, who nodded. "Yes," I said. "Tell everyone. Let them see what we're dealing with." The story aired on the local evening news 2 days later. By the next morning, it had been picked up by 3 national networks. By afternoon, it was trending on social media. The response was overwhelming. Disabled rights advocates rallied behind Ethan, calling Vanessa's conservatorship petition ableist and exploitative. Legal experts weighed in, questioning whether someone who had voluntarily terminated parental rights could later claim guardianship. Tech industry leaders who'd followed Access Point's success expressed outrage at the attempt to control Ethan's assets. And the public, thousands of ordinary people, shared their own stories of family members who disappeared during hard times, only to reappear when there was money involved. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Disability advocacy organizations wanted to help. And most surprisingly, lawyers, good lawyers from major firms, were calling to offer their services. "Miss Vasquez, my name is Patricia Chen with Morrison & Associates. I've been following your grandson's story, and I'd like to offer our firm's services pro bono. What's being done to Ethan is unconscionable, and we have significant experience with disability rights cases and conservatorship abuse." "Pro bono," I repeated, hardly daring to believe it. "You mean free?" "Completely free. We'll handle everything. The guardianship challenge, the conservatorship petition, all of it. Ethan's story needs to be heard, and people like your daughter need to understand they can't exploit disabled individuals just because they've achieved success." I accepted before she could change her mind. Within a week, we had a legal team that Vanessa's money couldn't match. More importantly, we had public opinion firmly on our side. The story of the abandoned disabled boy who became a tech success story, and the greedy mother who returned only when there was money to claim, it resonated with people in a way I hadn't anticipated. But Vanessa wasn't backing down. If anything, the publicity seemed to make her more determined. 3 days after the story went national, she held her own press conference in San Francisco. Standing in front of a backdrop with her company's logo, flanked by her lawyer and what appeared to be a disability rights advocate, Vanessa told a very different version of events. "I was 28 years old when my son was diagnosed with a severe disability. I was terrified and overwhelmed. I made the incredibly difficult decision to place him with my mother because I believed she could provide better care than I could at that time in my life. It wasn't abandonment, it was sacrifice. I've lived with the guilt and pain of that decision every day for 15 years. I've built a successful career, yes, but I've done it while carrying the weight of being separated from my son.
Now that I'm in a position to truly support him, to provide him with resources and opportunities I couldn't offer before, I'm being vilified for wanting to be part of his life? The disability advocate beside her spoke next, a woman who apparently ran a nonprofit for disabled adults.
What many people don't understand is that young adults with significant disabilities often need support in managing complex financial matters. There is nothing ableist or exploitative about ensuring proper conservatorship. In fact, it's protective. Miss Kellerman is trying to do right by her son, and she's being attacked for it by people who don't understand disability advocacy. I watched the press conference from my living room, feeling sick. Vanessa had somehow managed to frame herself as the victim, the devoted mother being kept from her disabled son by a controlling grandmother. She'd found advocates who legitimized her conservatorship petition, making it sound like protection rather than exploitation. The public opinion that had been so firmly in our corner began to waver. Some disability advocates who'd initially supported us started questioning whether we were being unfair to Vanessa. Articles appeared questioning whether I, as a 71-year-old woman, was really the best person to manage Ethan's affairs going forward. "She's good," Patricia Chen said when we met to discuss the press conference. "I'll give her that. She's reframed the entire narrative." "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling the momentum we'd built slipping away. Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. "We prove definitively and publicly that Ethan doesn't need a conservator, that he's fully capable of managing his own life and his own money. And we expose exactly what Vanessa's been doing for the past 15 years, because I guarantee she hasn't been the grieving mother she's pretending to be." She pulled out a folder. "I've had my team doing some research into your daughter's life, and what we've found is very interesting." Over the next hour, Patricia showed me what her investigators had uncovered. Social media posts from Vanessa's old accounts, before she deleted them and started fresh. Posts that showed a woman living her best life in Los Angeles, Denver, Seattle, with no mention of having a child. Financial records showing expensive purchases and luxury vacations with no corresponding child support payments. Interviews with former coworkers who had never known she had a son. She didn't just make a difficult decision and live with guilt. She erased him from her life completely. She built a new identity that didn't include being a mother. And we can prove it. "But will it matter?" I asked. "She's got advocates supporting her conservatorship petition. She's got money and resources. What if the court decides that, regardless of her past behavior, she's right that Ethan needs someone to manage his finances?" She smiled. "That's where Ethan comes in. We need to show the court and the public exactly how capable he is, not just of building an app, but of running a business, managing money, making complex decisions. We need to put Ethan on the stand and let him speak for himself." I looked at Ethan, who had been listening quietly to our entire conversation. "I can do that," he said firmly. "I want to do that. Let them see who I really am, not who they assume I am because I use a wheelchair." But as Patricia packed up her files and prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Eleanor, I need you to be prepared for this to get uglier before it gets better. Vanessa's team is going to attack you. They're going to paint you as controlling, as having isolated Ethan from his mother, as potentially having financial motivations of your own. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life and try to find anything they can to use against you. Can you handle that?" I thought about everything we'd already been through, the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the challenges we had overcome together. "Let them try," I said. "I've got nothing to hide. Every decision I made was for Ethan's benefit, and I can prove it." But that night, alone in my bedroom, I felt the weight of what was coming pressing down on me. This wasn't just about legal arguments anymore. This had become a public battle, a media spectacle, with Ethan's future and dignity hanging in the balance. And somewhere in San Francisco,
Vanessa was planning her next move, backed by lawyers and money and a carefully constructed image of the devoted mother returning to save her disabled son. The war had only just begun. The courthouse in downtown Tucson was imposing, a modern building of glass and concrete that gleamed in the Arizona sun like a monument to justice, or judgment, depending on which side you were on. It was a Wednesday morning in late June, nearly 4 months after Vanessa had first appeared on my doorstep with her lawyer. 4 months of legal maneuvering, media coverage, public opinion swinging back and forth like a pendulum. 4 months of sleepless nights and constant anxiety, wondering if this would be the fight that finally broke us. Patricia Chen met us in the parking lot, looking crisp and professional in a charcoal gray suit, her briefcase in hand and determination in her eyes. "Ready?" she asked, though it was clear from her tone that ready or not, we were doing this. I looked at Ethan, who sat in his wheelchair wearing the navy blue suit we'd bought for this occasion. His first suit ever, purchased with money from Access Point that wasn't tied up in legal proceedings. He looked older than his 19-year-old years, his jaw set with resolve, but his hands trembling slightly on the armrests of his chair. "We're ready," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The courtroom was already packed when we entered. I recognized reporters from several major outlets, disability rights advocates on both sides of the issue, and scattered throughout the gallery, faces I knew from our neighborhood, from the library where I'd worked, from Ethan's therapy sessions over the years, people who'd watched us struggle and survive, who'd been part of our community. And there, at the plaintiff's table, sat Vanessa.
She looked every inch the successful executive, her hair styled perfectly, wearing an expensive cream-colored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my pension. Next to her sat Richard Thornton and 2 other attorneys I didn't recognize. Behind them were what appeared to be expert witnesses, including the disability advocate who'd spoken at Vanessa's press conference. Vanessa turned as we entered, and for just a moment our eyes met across the courtroom. I searched her face for any sign of doubt, any flicker of conscience, but her expression was carefully neutral, professional, as if this were just another business meeting rather than a battle for her son's autonomy and future. Judge Maria Rodriguez entered, and we all rose. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Patricia had told me Judge Rodriguez had a reputation for being fair, but no nonsense, someone who wouldn't be swayed by emotion or theatrics. "We're here today," Judge Rodriguez began after we'd all taken our seats, "to address 2 petitions filed by Vanessa Kellerman. First, a motion to terminate the existing guardianship held by Eleanor Vasquez and establish Ms. Kellerman as legal guardian of Ethan Brennan. Second, a petition for conservatorship over Mr. Brennan's financial assets and personal affairs. This is a complex case that has attracted significant public attention, but I want to be clear, this courtroom is not a media circus. We're here to determine what's in the best interest of a young man who will soon be a legal adult. Mr. Thornton, you may present your opening statement." Richard Thornton stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. He was good at his job. I had to give him that. Over the next 15 minutes, he painted a picture of Vanessa as a devoted mother who'd made an impossible choice when faced with overwhelming circumstances. "Your Honor, Miss Kellerman was 28 years old when her son was diagnosed with severe cerebral palsy. She was terrified, inexperienced, and genuinely believed that her mother, who had successfully raised a child as a single parent, could provide better care than she could at that stage of her life. This wasn't abandonment. It was an act of profound love and sacrifice." He pulled out documents showing Vanessa's birthday cards to Ethan, her occasional attempts to reach out that had allegedly been rebuffed by me, her consistent financial contributions, which was news to me and likely fabricated or heavily exaggerated. Now, 15 years later, Miss Kellerman is established in her career, financially stable, and ready to fulfill her role as Ethan's mother. She wants to provide him with opportunities and resources that, frankly, Ms. Vasquez, despite her admirable efforts, simply cannot provide. But this isn't just about guardianship, it's about protecting Ethan's substantial assets. Thornton's expression became grave.
Ethan Brennan is a young man with significant physical and cognitive challenges who has created, through remarkable effort and some good fortune, substantial wealth. But managing $3.2 million requires financial sophistication, business acumen, and protection from those who might exploit him. We have expert testimony that will demonstrate that individuals with Ethan's disabilities are at high risk for financial exploitation and that proper conservatorship is not just advisable, it's necessary. He sat down, looking satisfied. Patricia stood, and I noticed she didn't bother with the formal gestures, the theatrical pauses. She just spoke, direct and clear. Your Honor, this case is actually very simple, despite attempts to complicate it. Vanessa Kellerman didn't make a difficult choice 15 years ago. She made a legal choice. She voluntarily terminated her parental rights. She signed papers, went through legal proceedings, and formally gave up her son. That wasn't a temporary arrangement or an informal agreement. It was a complete legal severance. She placed a stack of documents on the table. These are the termination papers, signed by both Miss Kellerman and her then-husband, Cole Brennan. No coercion, no extenuating circumstances, just two parents deciding they didn't want to raise a disabled child. And for 15 years, Miss Kellerman lived accordingly. She moved away. She changed her contact information. She built a life that didn't include Ethan. We have evidence, social media posts, statements from former colleagues, financial records, showing that she erased him from her existence. Patricia's voice hardened. And now that Ethan has built something extraordinary, now that he's worth millions of dollars, suddenly Miss Kellerman remembers she's a mother. Suddenly she wants guardianship and conservatorship. The timing isn't coincidental, it's calculated. She turned to face Vanessa directly. This isn't about protecting Ethan. It's about controlling his money. And we're going to prove it. The first day of testimony was brutal. Vanessa took the stand, and I had to admit, she was compelling. She cried at the right moments, her voice breaking when she described the impossible decision she'd faced at 28. She talked about the guilt she'd carried, the therapy she'd undergone, the personal growth she'd achieved. I thought I was doing the right thing. Your Honor, I thought Ethan would be better off with my mother, who had experience and patience I lacked. I sent birthday cards, Your Honor. I reached out when I could, but my mother made it clear I wasn't welcome, that I'd made my choice and needed to live with it. I wanted to jump up and scream that she was lying, that those generic cards had no return address, that she'd been the one who disappeared. But Patricia put a restraining hand on my arm.
"Let her dig her hole," Patricia whispered. "We'll bury her in it later." Vanessa's expert witnesses were equally impressive. A neuropsychologist testified about the cognitive challenges that often accompany cerebral palsy, about how processing speed and executive function could be impaired, making financial management difficult. A financial advisor talked about the complexity of managing substantial wealth and the high rate of exploitation faced by disabled individuals who come into money. A disability rights advocate, the same woman from Vanessa's press conference, testified about the importance of proper conservatorship in protecting vulnerable adults. She spoke eloquently about ableism and independence, somehow managing to make it sound like forcing a conservator on Ethan against his will was actually respecting his autonomy. By the time court adjourned that first day, I felt defeated. They'd built a case that sounded reasonable, protective, almost benevolent. They'd made Vanessa look like a reformed woman seeking redemption, and me look like an overprotective grandmother who couldn't accept that my role was ending. "Don't lose faith," Patricia said as we packed up. "Tomorrow we present our case, and trust me, everything changes tomorrow." That night, I sat with Ethan in our living room, both of us exhausted and anxious. "What if we lose?" Ethan asked quietly. "What if the judge believes her?" "Then we appeal," I said firmly. "We keep fighting. But Ethan, no matter what happens, I want you to know something. You are brilliant, capable, and strong. Whatever the court decides doesn't change that. Your disability doesn't define you, and it certainly doesn't make you incapable of managing your own life." "I know," he said. "But does the judge know that?" Tomorrow, I promise, we're going to make sure she does. Day 2 began with Patricia calling her first witness, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a neuropsychologist who'd evaluated Ethan at our request. Dr. Mitchell, you've reviewed Ethan's medical records and conducted a comprehensive evaluation of his cognitive abilities. Can you share your findings? Dr. Mitchell, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an authoritative demeanor, consulted her notes. Ethan Brennan has cerebral palsy that affects his physical mobility and speech production. However, his cognitive function is not only intact, it's exceptional. His IQ tests in the superior range at 138. His executive function, processing speed, and problem-solving abilities are all well above average. He demonstrates sophisticated understanding of complex systems, advanced mathematical reasoning, and creative problem-solving. She looked directly at the judge. To suggest that Ethan needs a conservator to manage his finances is not just unnecessary, it's insulting. He built a multi-million-dollar application through years of sophisticated coding, business planning, and strategic thinking. Those aren't the actions of someone who needs his financial decisions made for him. Thornton's cross-examination was aggressive. Dr. Mitchell, isn't it true that individuals with cerebral palsy often have impaired executive function? Some do, yes. Ethan doesn't. And isn't it true that the complexity of managing $3.2 million is beyond what most 19-year-olds, even neurotypical ones, can handle? Which is why most 19-year-olds have financial advisors, accountants, and business managers, people they choose and hire, not conservators imposed on them by the court. Ethan is perfectly capable of making those hiring decisions himself. But wouldn't it be safer? Safer for whom? Dr. Mitchell interrupted, her voice sharp. Safer for Ethan or safer for people who want to control his money? Because from where I'm sitting, the only threat to Ethan's financial well-being is having it controlled by someone who abandoned him and only returned when he became valuable. Judge Rodriguez raised an eyebrow at the editorializing, but didn't rebuke Dr. Mitchell. Patricia's next witness was James Wu, Ethan's business partner and the venture capitalist who'd funded Access Point's launch. Mr. Wu, you've worked closely with Ethan for 2 years. Can you describe his business capabilities? James, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s, smiled. Ethan is one of the most astute business people I've worked with in 20 years in venture capital. He understands market dynamics, user needs, growth strategies, and financial planning better than most MBAs I've funded. He's made every major decision regarding Access Point, himself. When to launch, how to price it, which features to prioritize, when to accept acquisition offers, and every decision has been sound. Has he ever needed someone to make decisions for him? Never. He consults, as any smart entrepreneur does, but the decisions are always his, and they're always good ones. Thornton's cross-examination focused on the fact that I'd attended many business meetings with Ethan, suggesting I'd been making decisions for him. Mr. Wu, Mrs. Vasquez accompanied Ethan to meetings, correct? Yes, because Ethan has mobility challenges and needed transportation. Also, early on, some potential investors were dismissive when they saw a teenager in a wheelchair. Eleanor's presence lent credibility until Ethan could prove himself. So she was necessary? She was helpful. There's a difference. Ethan could have done it alone if he'd had to. Eleanor being there just made ignorant people more comfortable, which says more about them than about Ethan's capabilities. Then Patricia called several of Ethan's former teachers and therapists, each testifying to his intelligence, independence, and capability. They painted a picture of a young man who'd consistently exceeded expectations, who'd fought for every achievement, who'd proven himself capable in every way that mattered.
Finally, Patricia called me to the stand. I was terrified. I'd never been in a courtroom before, never been cross-examined by hostile attorneys who were paid to make me look bad. But as I sat down and looked out at Ethan and his wheelchair, at the community members who'd shown up to support us, at the reporters documenting everything, I found my courage. Patricia walked me through 15 years of raising Ethan. The challenges, yes, but more importantly, the triumphs. His first word after speech therapy, the day he read his first book,
the moment he showed me his first line of code. Every milestone we'd celebrated together. Miss Vasquez, why did you agree to take guardianship of Ethan when Vanessa terminated her rights? Because he's my grandson and I love him. Because someone had to put his needs first. Because he deserved to be more than a burden someone walked away from. I looked directly at Vanessa. Because I knew that if I didn't take him, he'd go into the system, and I couldn't let that happen to him. Did Vanessa ever visit in the past 15 years? Never. No visits, no phone calls beyond those first few birthday cards. She changed her number and didn't give me the new one. She moved away and didn't tell me where. She built a life that erased Ethan completely. And now she's back. What do you think about that? I think it's convenient timing. Ethan was a burden when he needed everything. Now he's valuable, so suddenly she's a devoted mother. But being a parent isn't about showing up when things are easy or profitable. It's about being there through the hard times, and she wasn't. Thornton's cross-examination was exactly as brutal as Patricia had warned. Miss Vasquez, isn't it true that you've isolated Ethan from his mother? No, she isolated herself by leaving. You never facilitated contact between them? She never asked for contact. She had my number, my address. She chose not to use them. Isn't it true that you have financial motivations here, that you've been managing Ethan's money and don't want to lose control of it? I've managed his medical expenses and basic needs. The Access Point money is in a business account with both our names, and I haven't touched it except for business purposes. I have my own pension. I don't need Ethan's money. But you took out loans against your house to fund his business, loans he's now in a position to repay. Isn't that a financial motivation? I felt anger rise in my chest. I took out loans to support my grandson's dream. If he chooses to help me pay them back, that's generosity, not obligation. Unlike some people in this courtroom, I don't see Ethan as a bank account to manage. I see him as a person to love. Judge Rodriguez called for a lunch recess before things could escalate further. The afternoon session began with the testimony everyone had been waiting for, Ethan himself. Patricia had prepared him extensively, but I still held my breath as he was sworn in. He'd insisted on wheeling himself to the witness stand without assistance, a small assertion of independence that I knew was deliberate. Ethan, Patricia began gently, tell the court about your relationship with your grandmother. Ethan's speech had improved dramatically over the years, but he still spoke more slowly than average, choosing his words carefully. But that deliberateness made him sound more thoughtful, more mature. Gran Eleanor is the only parent I've ever really known. She's been there for every moment of my life that matters. Every doctor's appointment, every therapy session, every birthday, every achievement. When I was little and other kids made fun of my wheelchair, she taught me that my worth wasn't determined by my body. When I discovered I loved coding, she found ways to support it, even when we didn't have money. When I wanted to build Access Point, she believed in me when nobody else did. She didn't raise me because she had to. She raised me because she wanted to, because she loved me. And she never once made me feel like a burden. How do you feel about your mother's petition for guardianship and conservatorship? I feel like I'm being treated as property instead of a person. My mother didn't want me when I was a disabled child who needed help. Now, she wants to control me because I'm a disabled adult who has money. Both positions see me as defined by my disability rather than who I am as a person, and I reject both. Patricia pulled out documents. Ethan, these are financial statements for Access Point and your personal accounts. Can you walk the court through them? For the next 20 minutes, Ethan demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of his business finances, investment strategies, tax implications, and future planning that impressed even Judge Rodriguez, whose eyebrows rose higher with each explanation. I work with a financial advisor I hired, an accountant my business partner recommended, and a lawyer Patricia connected me with. I make all final decisions after consulting with them. That's not being unable to manage my own affairs, that's being smart enough to know when to ask for help, which is what any intelligent business person does, disabled or not. Then came Thornton's cross-examination, and I could see him calculating how to attack without appearing to bully a disabled teenager in front of a judge and media audience. Ethan, you're very articulate, but isn't it true that your disability affects your processing speed? My cerebral palsy affects my muscle control, not my thinking. I might speak more slowly than you do, but that doesn't mean I think more slowly. In fact, I'd argue that taking time to think before speaking leads to better decisions, not worse. Several people in the gallery actually chuckled. But managing $3.2 million is complicated.
I built an application worth $3.2 million from my bedroom, using equipment I convinced people to loan or donate. I taught myself 5 programming languages. I designed an AI system that adapts to user needs. I negotiated with venture capitalists and major tech corporations. Which part of that suggests I can't read a financial statement? Thornton changed tactics. Don't you think your grandmother has influenced your opposition to your mother's involvement? Gran Eleanor has taught me to think for myself. She's also taught me that actions matter more than words. My mother's actions for 15 years were abandonment. Her actions now are financial opportunism. I don't need Gran Eleanor to tell me how to feel about that. The facts speak for themselves. But your mother says she's changed, that she's grown. Then she can demonstrate that change by respecting my autonomy instead of trying to take it away. If she wanted a relationship with me, she'd be asking me to dinner, not taking me to court. The fact that she's pursuing legal control rather than personal connection tells me everything I need to know about her motivations. Thornton sat down, clearly realizing he was only making things worse. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. Ethan, I'd like to ask you a question directly. If I deny these petitions, if I maintain your grandmother's guardianship and refuse the conservatorship, what are your plans for when you turn 20 and the guardianship automatically ends? I plan to hire a financial management team that I choose. I plan to continue developing Access Point and exploring new projects. I plan to maintain a relationship with my grandmother based on love and mutual respect, not legal obligation. And I plan to use some of my resources to help other disabled young people pursue their dreams, because I know how hard it is to get support when people assume your disability makes you incapable. He paused, then added, and I plan to never speak to my biological mother again, because I've learned that family isn't about DNA, it's about who shows up, and she never has. The courtroom was dead silent. Closing arguments came the next morning. Thornton gave an impassioned speech about second chances, about the complexity of managing wealth, about the importance of biological connections. He portrayed Vanessa as a reformed woman seeking redemption, and Eleanor as well-meaning but ultimately inadequate for the challenges ahead. Patricia's closing was shorter and sharper. Your Honor, this case isn't complicated. A mother abandoned her disabled son. For 15 years, she had zero contact with him. She built a life that pretended he didn't exist. And now, conveniently timed with his sudden wealth, she wants control. Not a relationship, control. She's not asking to spend time with him. She's asking for legal authority over his life and assets. She gestured to Ethan. Meanwhile, you have a 19-year-old man who has demonstrated exceptional capability, intelligence, and business acumen. He's built a multi-million-dollar company. He's managed complex business relationships. He's made sophisticated financial decisions. The only reason we're questioning his capability is his disability. And that's exactly the kind of ableist assumption that conservatorship abuse relies on. Patricia's voice rose. Ethan Brennan doesn't need a conservator. He needs what every young adult needs: support, guidance, and respect for his autonomy. He has all of that from his grandmother. What he doesn't need is a legal prison created by a mother who wants his money but never wanted him.
Judge Rodriguez called for a recess to make her decision. The 2 hours we waited felt like 2 years. I sat in the hallway with Ethan, both of us too nervous to talk much. Patricia was confident, but I'd learned that confidence didn't always translate to victory in court. Finally, we were called back in. Judge Rodriguez looked at all of us, me, Ethan, Vanessa, the lawyers, with an expression I couldn't read. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence in this case, and I'm prepared to rule. First, regarding the petition to terminate Eleanor Vasquez's guardianship and establish Vanessa Kellerman as guardian. This petition is denied. I felt Ethan grab my hand, squeezing tight. Ms. Kellerman, you voluntarily and legally terminated your parental rights 15 years ago. That was your choice, but choices have consequences. You cannot simply reclaim those rights when it becomes financially advantageous. The guardianship arrangement has been successful, and Mr. Brennan will age out of it in a matter of months anyway. There is no compelling reason to disrupt it now. Vanessa's face had gone pale. Second, regarding the conservatorship petition, this is also denied. I've seen no evidence that Ethan Brennan lacks the capacity to manage his own affairs. To the contrary, he's demonstrated exceptional capability. His disability affects his mobility and speech, not his cognition or judgment. To impose a conservatorship on him would be, frankly, discriminatory. Judge Rodriguez's expression hardened as she looked at Vanessa. Ms. Kellerman, I'm troubled by this case. The timing of your sudden interest in your son, combined with your 15-year absence, suggests motivations that have nothing to do with his well-being. You had 15 years to seek a relationship. You chose not to. You don't get to reverse that decision now that it's financially beneficial. She turned to Ethan. Mr. Brennan, you'll turn 20 in a few months, at which point the guardianship ends automatically. Based on everything I've seen, you'll do just fine. You're bright, capable, and surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. I wish you every success. The gavel came down, and it was over. The hallway outside the courtroom erupted in celebration. Disability rights advocates who'd supported us were cheering, reporters were shouting questions. Patricia was beaming, accepting congratulations from other lawyers. I built an application worth $3.2 million from my bedroom, using equipment I convinced people to loan or donate. I taught myself 5 programming languages. I designed an AI system that adapts to user needs. I negotiated with venture capitalists and major tech corporations. Which part of that suggests I can't read a financial statement? Thornton changed tactics. Don't you think your grandmother has influenced your opposition to your mother's involvement? Gran Eleanor has taught me to think for myself. She's also taught me that actions matter more than words. My mother's actions for 15 years were abandonment. Her actions now are financial opportunism. I don't need Gran Eleanor to tell me how to feel about that. The facts speak for themselves. But your mother says she's changed, that she's grown. Then she can demonstrate that change by respecting my autonomy instead of trying to take it away. If she wanted a relationship with me, she'd be asking me to dinner, not taking me to court. The fact that she's pursuing legal control rather than personal connection tells me everything I need to know about her motivations. Thornton sat down, clearly realizing he was only making things worse. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. Ethan, I'd like to ask you a question directly. If I deny these petitions, if I maintain your grandmother's guardianship and refuse the conservatorship, what are your plans for when you turn 20 and the guardianship automatically ends? I plan to hire a financial management team that I choose. I plan to continue developing Access Point and exploring new projects. I plan to maintain a relationship with my grandmother based on love and mutual respect, not legal obligation. And I plan to use some of my resources to help other disabled young people pursue their dreams, because I know how hard it is to get support when people assume your disability makes you incapable. He paused, then added, and I plan to never speak to my biological mother again, because I've learned that family isn't about DNA. It's about who shows up, and she never has. The courtroom was dead silent. Closing arguments came the next morning. Thornton gave an impassioned speech about second chances, about the complexity of managing wealth, about the importance of biological connections. He portrayed Vanessa as a reformed woman seeking redemption, and Eleanor as well-meaning but ultimately inadequate for the challenges ahead. Patricia's closing was shorter and sharper. Your Honor, this case isn't complicated. A mother abandoned her disabled son. For 15 years, she had zero contact with him. She built a life that pretended he didn't exist. And now, conveniently timed with his sudden wealth, she wants control. Not a relationship, control. She's not asking to spend time with him. She's asking for legal authority over his life and assets. She gestured to Ethan. Meanwhile, you have a 19-year-old man who has demonstrated exceptional capability, intelligence, and business acumen. He's built a multi-million-dollar company. He's managed complex business relationships. He's made sophisticated financial decisions. The only reason we're questioning his capability is his disability. And that's exactly the kind of ableist assumption that conservatorship abuse relies on. Patricia's voice rose. Ethan Brennan doesn't need a conservator. He needs what every young adult needs: support, guidance, and respect for his autonomy. He has all of that from his grandmother. What he doesn't need is a legal prison created by a mother who wants his money but never wanted him. Judge Rodriguez called for a recess to make her decision. The 2 hours we waited felt like 2 years. I sat in the hallway with Ethan, both of us too nervous to talk much. Patricia was confident, but I'd learned that confidence didn't always translate to victory in court. Finally, we were called back in. Judge Rodriguez looked at all of us, me, Ethan, Vanessa, the lawyers, with an expression I couldn't read. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence in this case, and I'm prepared to rule. First, regarding the petition to terminate Eleanor Vasquez's guardianship and establish Vanessa Kellerman as guardian. This petition is denied. I felt Ethan grab my hand, squeezing tight. Ms. Kellerman, you voluntarily and legally terminated your parental rights 15 years ago. That was your choice, but choices have consequences. You cannot simply reclaim those rights when it becomes financially advantageous. The guardianship arrangement has been successful, and Mr. Brennan will age out of it in a matter of months anyway. There is no compelling reason to disrupt it now. Vanessa's face had gone pale. Second, regarding the conservatorship petition, this is also denied. I've seen no evidence that Ethan Brennan lacks the capacity to manage his own affairs. To the contrary, he's demonstrated exceptional capability. His disability affects his mobility and speech, not his cognition or judgment. To impose a conservatorship on him would be, frankly, discriminatory. Judge Rodriguez's expression hardened as she looked at Vanessa. Ms. Kellerman, I'm troubled by this case. The timing of your sudden interest in your son, combined with your 15-year absence, suggests motivations that have nothing to do with his well-being. You had 15 years to seek a relationship. You chose not to. You don't get to reverse that decision now that it's financially beneficial. She turned to Ethan. Mr. Brennan, you'll turn 20 in a few months, at which point the guardianship ends automatically. Based on everything I've seen, you'll do just fine. You're bright, capable, and surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. I wish you every success. The gavel came down, and it was over. The hallway outside the courtroom erupted in celebration. Disability rights advocates who'd supported us were cheering, reporters were shouting questions. Patricia was beaming, accepting congratulations from other lawyers.
But I just held on to Ethan, both of us crying with relief and joy and the overwhelming emotion of having survived this ordeal. "We won," Ethan kept saying. "Gran Eleanor, we won." "You won," I corrected. "You proved who you are. You showed everyone that your disability doesn't define your capability. I'm so proud of you." Vanessa and her lawyers left quickly through a side exit, avoiding the media crowd. I caught one last glimpse of her face.
Anger, frustration, and maybe buried deep, a flicker of shame. But she didn't look back, didn't try to speak to Ethan, just disappeared into a waiting car and drove away. I wondered if she'd realize what she'd really lost. Not the money, but the chance to know this extraordinary person. But that was her burden to carry, not ours. 6 months later, I stood in a conference room in downtown Phoenix watching Ethan sign the final papers for the Access Point acquisition. The check for $3.2 million was deposited into his business account, and just like that, everything changed. The first thing Ethan did was insist on paying off the loan I'd taken against my house. The second thing was to set up a trust fund that would ensure I never had to worry about money again. "Gran Eleanor, you sacrificed 15 years for me," he said when I protested. "Let me give you back some of what you gave up. Travel, take art classes, live the retirement you should have had." But more importantly, Ethan launched the Vasquez Foundation, named after me, despite my objections. It provided grants, equipment, and support to disabled young people pursuing careers in technology. Every year, it would help dozens of kids who faced the same barriers Ethan had overcome. "We're going to make sure no disabled kid is told they can't achieve their dreams because of their disability," Ethan told me. "We're going to prove that accessibility isn't about limitation, it's about possibility." As for Vanessa, we never heard from her again. She didn't appeal the court's decision. The media attention had damaged her reputation enough that she apparently decided to cut her losses and disappear back into her life in San Francisco. I occasionally wondered if she thought about Ethan, if she regretted not just her recent actions, but her original choice to walk away. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. Because the truth was, Vanessa had given me the greatest gift imaginable, even if she'd meant it as rejection. She'd given me Ethan. This brilliant, kind, determined young man who'd transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. Yes, it had been hard. Yes, I'd sacrificed things I'd wanted. Yes, there had been moments of exhaustion and despair and wondering if I could keep going. But watching Ethan thrive, seeing him use his gifts to help others, being part of his journey from an abandoned 3-year-old to a successful, confident young man who was changing the world, that was worth every sacrifice I had made and more. We'd started with nothing but love and determination. We'd faced abandonment, poverty, ableism, and a legal system that could have crushed us. But we survived. We won. Not just in court, but in life. And as I watched Ethan being interviewed by tech journalists about his vision for accessible technology, speaking with confidence and clarity about breaking down barriers and expanding possibilities, I realized something. Vanessa hadn't just abandoned Ethan, she'd abandoned the chance to be part of something extraordinary. She'd walked away from the opportunity to watch a person overcome obstacles and achieve greatness. She'd traded a relationship with an exceptional human being for a career and lifestyle that, in the end, hadn't been worth what she'd given up. Her loss, our gain. At 71 years old, I'd found purpose, meaning, and joy in ways I never expected. I had a grandson who taught me about courage, resilience, and the difference between being disabled and being incapable. I had a community that had rallied around us. I had a future that looked bright instead of lonely. And I had the satisfaction of knowing that when faced with the choice between easy and right, between selfish and selfless, between walking away and showing up, I'd chosen right every single time. That night, back in our small house in Tucson, the house that Vanessa had once mocked as inadequate, the house that had witnessed 15 years of struggle and growth, Ethan and I sat on the back patio watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Gran Eleanor, I know I don't say this enough, but thank you for everything. For choosing me when my own mother wouldn't, for believing in me when people said I couldn't, for fighting for me when it would have been easier to let her win." I took his hand, this young man who'd started as an abandoned toddler and grown into someone who was changing the world. "Ethan, you never have to thank me. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life.
You've given me so much more than I ever gave you. That's not possible. It's absolutely possible. You gave me purpose when I thought my useful years were over. You gave me joy during what could have been a lonely old age. You taught me that family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about showing up every day with love and commitment. You made my life meaningful, Ethan, and I will never regret a single moment of raising you.
We sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who'd found family in each other when biology had failed them. Two survivors of abandonment who'd built something beautiful from rejection. And somewhere out there, Vanessa was living her life with her corporate success and her wealthy husband and her carefully curated image. But she'd never have what we had, this connection, this love, this shared history of overcoming impossible odds together. She'd made her choice 15 years ago, and every day since, we'd proven it was the wrong one.